Hello there, Simplex is the name, Eurospy is the game. Today's film features two bumbling thieves with a flair for small-sized shoes, a photograph that comes alive, and a character called Eastside Charlie who no longer lives on the East Side and in fact has taken up residence in Italy. It's Assassination in Rome. So, welcome back to Eurospy Cinema, a series where I review various movies that fit into the Eurospy category. Even if Assassination in Rome is probably stretching the definition of Eurospy a bit, I'm running with it anyway. A really good Italian thriller by Silvio Amadio, Assassination in Rome is often sold alongside the film I reviewed a little while ago, Espionage In Tangiers. The film starts strong. During the opening credits, we see this woman here wake up and notice that her husband is gone. She rings the embassy about it, but they say that considering he was not a diplomat, she'll just have to call back in the morning. Meanwhile, this drunk guy walks around a fountain and discovers a dead man next to it. The next thing, we see a somewhat smart thief and his bumbling accomplice break into this dead man's home. The home has already been ransacked, much to their surprise. Meanwhile, the police have found the body. A sarcastic inspector and our protagonist, Dominic Sherman, exchange witticisms and they part. Later, the police receive the coroner's report. It seems that the man died of an overdose of drugs, except that he had not taken any drugs in the last 6 months. It also seems that he had recently been bound in chains. For me, this is a really good intro. There's a mystery set up and we're introduced to a number of characters in a very fluid way. There's sort of 4 groups created: the police, the thieves, the reporter, the widow. The audience knows that these groups are all connected, and we're made to anticipate how they're all going to meet and interact with each other at some point. We just don't know how yet. Anyway, after this intro, we then realise that Dominic and the woman at the beginning, Shelley Norman, have had a bit of history together. And he finally finds her and says,
"When we have a martini, you can tell me about it."
We cut to them drinking 2 drinks that don't look very martini-like, but who knows, maybe the bar was out of martini glasses. They have a little chat, and finally Shelley tells Dominic about the situation with their husband Bill. This prompts Sherman to go visit the inspector from earlier. The inspector, however, doesn't seem too concerned with Shelley's case, and instead enlists Dominic's help to consider the case of the man who died of a drug overdose earlier. They discuss the facts and conclude that this sure is a mystery. Dominic later goes to visit a man who was attempting to contact Shelley's husband over the past week. This is probably one of the best scenes in the film. The whole room is shrouded in darkness because the man has very poor eyesight. He coughs continually and seems to compulsively be drawing on a notepad. Overall, the scene is exceptionally suspenseful. The audience, much like Dominic, are left with more questions than answers, and we are made to wonder who this old man truly is. Is he more involved than he lets on? He seems harmless, but this may all be a charade. Following this, the duo visits a friend of Shelley and Bill's called Barilli, who acts really suspiciously and claims that his wife is in Florence, so she would have no involvement with Bill's disappearance. Meanwhile, the 2 crooks from earlier have found a suspicious package in the heel of a shoe. Overall, these scenes with the thieves are pretty good. They're very much the comic relief of the film, and the contrast between serious espionage and the sudden comic scene does actually work pretty well to keep at least me engaged throughout the film. Any point where there could seem to be some kind of low point or boring section for our characters to think out a problem, we suddenly cut to the other group to keep us engaged. Also, one of Dominic's former flames, Erica, randomly shows up here and starts working for him. She's introduced very suddenly, and overall this intro scene for her lets the audience know that she's really just there for an excuse to cram another girl onto the film poster. Later, Dominic is called by the police to the home of the dead man. He has a book with Bill's name and number in it. The crooks then call the apartment in an effort to discover what's in the heel of the shoe. So the police clear out and just leave the inspector. The dopey crook shows up and tries to extort some money from him for the item in the shoe, but he's instead arrested. Later, Shelley identifies the body of the dead man as being someone she once took a photograph of. Following this is another actually pretty solid scene. This time, it's a flashback of the events of a few days ago. We see Shelley already having a strained relationship with her husband, while tension is brewing. The scene does a very nice job of never showing us Bill's face. This works to create 2 great effects. The first of these is to show how removed Bill is from Shelley's life. He's become a background character in their own marriage. The second effect is that the audience is made to feel no sympathy for Bill. By not showing his face, he is thus dehumanized slightly, accentuating his overall cold and very platonic demeanor. Following this magical scene, Dominic receives an invitation to dinner by Eastside Charlie, a narcotics dealer. Dominic shows Charlie a photograph of the dead man from the beginning, but Charlie says that the man was never involved in his organization. Charlie says he's clean and starts to get angry thinking he's been set up, so he calls his lawyer in America for help in identifying the mystery man. In a very sudden scene and time transition, we cut to Charlie having already gone to and back from America. He meets Dominic at the airport, but is killed by this assassin. However, Dominic is able to get enough information from Charlie before he dies to discover that Bill was into gambling. It seems that the reason he came to Italy was to win it back. Dominic and Shelley then go to Venice, as there is a report of somebody looking like Bill having had an accident there. They arrive and find Bill in a terrible state, having been tortured and received brain damage. There's a very nice bit of character development for Dominic here. We discover through a very tough conversation that the real reason Dominic left Shelley was because he himself felt inadequate. Suddenly, the duo come across Irina Borelli, the wife of Mr. Borelli from earlier. And if you remember, he had said she was in Florence, but here they find her in Venice, which makes Dominic race after her. After she loses him, she meets a suspicious-looking guy and hands him a number of parcels before he boards a train. Dominic returns and finds Bill convulsing and repeating the name Maturio and red dress. Maturio is in fact the suspicious old guy in the dark room from earlier, so Dominic goes back there, finding that the old guy's actually skipped town now. They discover a secret staircase behind a cabinet, and downstairs is a baddie who knocks them out and escapes. Dominic and the inspector have a look around, they find the red dress and some kind of torture device. From this, they piece together that Bill and Mario, the guy found dead in the beginning, must have had a falling out with Maturio, so he tortured them. Dominic then goes looking for Dino, the thief from earlier. As established earlier, Dino loves fast cars, so when Dick pulls up in his car in front of Dino claiming there's a problem with his motor, Dino just can't help himself and hops in for a ride, thus Dominic easily gets the package off him. The package seems to contain blueprints or plans of some kind, and it becomes apparent that Bill was going to sell these blueprints to pay off his debts. Dominic gives the microfilm to Shelley and leaves it up to her as to whether to reveal this secret or not. He leaves, and we understand now that he did this all for love. Then he goes home to his flat and finds it's been raided. Suspense is built really well in this next scene here. After not having found the microfilm in Bill's apartment, the goon has gone over to Shelley's apartment to find it. Meanwhile, Dominic and the inspector are racing to save her. Through some superb camera work and acting, the audience can really feel Shelley's pure terror of this man as he chases her through her house. In desperation, she hides herself in a wardrobe, but to no avail. The goon seems to be psychic as he immediately knows where she's hiding and begins to try to break the door in. Just before he breaks through it, however, Dominic arrives and saves her. We then cut to the hospital. The operation was a success, and Bill will recover soon. Erica then shows up and says she'll help Shelley stay up at night with Bill. Later that night, Dominic reads some of Erica's writing and comes to some revelation unknown to the audience. Meanwhile, Maturio shows up at the hospital and attempts to kill Bill in a fairly intense and suspenseful sequence. Thankfully, Dominic shows up and chases Maturio away. As he escapes, we see Maturio in more and more well-lit locations as the sequence goes on, making it increasingly easy to tell that Maturio must actually be somebody else in disguise. Once the police show up, Dominic chases Maturio onto the roof. However, Maturio missteps and falls through a skylight and dies. Dominic then goes down to him and examines the body. He removes Maturio's mask, revealing that it was in fact Erica in disguise the whole time. So we cut to Sherman and the inspector seeing Shelley off at the airport. She's going to America, but don't worry, she will return soon. The couple embrace and the film ends. Overall, Assassination in Rome is a pretty cool Eurospy thriller film. The best way I can describe it is it's kind of like a cheaper version of Charade. It's very suspenseful, it features a number of pretty surprising plot twists, but does seem to feature a number of scenes that don't actually really go anywhere. That's not to say it isn't good, the film is well worth a watch, but it is fairly obvious that there was probably a fair amount of inspiration taken from Charade, which had released 2 years prior. Charade itself is a tightly written, directed and acted film with a very streamlined plot, and overall Assassination in Rome is a fairly tight film too. However, as it nears the end, there are a number of rather inconsequential scenes, such as this moment of Mrs. Borelli replacing a vase of flowers for no explained reason, or that other moment where Eastside Charlie goes to America and then returns, but there is no transitioning scene in between, which makes it quite abrupt. Hugh O'Brien, who played Dominic Sherman, does do a pretty good job with the character, considering he was only a last-minute casting choice after John Gavin had to pull out. He is very much being the classic 60s suave gentleman hero and does do the part justice pretty well with a good physicality for the job, being very convincing in the few fights that the film has. Overall, there isn't really a whole lot to say about his performance, besides it just being pretty solid. Sid Charisse plays Shelley North very well, doing an exceptionally great job in the sort of dreamlike flashback sequences, where she very accurately shows the audience how distant her and her husband really were. Her love for Dominic is fairly well portrayed too, especially their history together, which is demonstrated through a very economic amount of screen time. Alberto Closas, who played the inspector, does another solid performance. Even though he's dubbed, he certainly makes up for it with a very expressive face. I found myself always focusing on this guy's facial expressions. They're so good for getting an idea on what the original actor's emotions must have been in the scene. Erica, and by extent Maturio, were played by Eleonora Rossi Drago. My apologies for butchering that Italian name, and overall she plays her part very well. Her introduction into the story does feel very forced, however, and the whole character just overall feels very tacked on to most of the film. But most astoundingly, this actually works in favour of the film, as it tricks the audience into thinking that she'll never actually have any major impact on the plot, only for the reverse to happen, and we discover that she was the main villain. The music for this film was composed by Armando Trovadoli, and is very suitably written. None of it's terrible, but none of it's spectacular. It's just overall very fitting and very Eurospy. In conclusion, Assassination in Rome is a pretty solid Eurospy adventure. As mentioned earlier, the film takes a bit of influence from the classic thriller charade, which is amazing if you somehow haven't watched it. But this influence is, to be honest, more tonal than anything directly lifted, so I don't think it hindered my enjoyment. In fact, it was kind of cool to find another Hitchcock not made by Hitchcock, albeit a bit more inferior. All the actors are putting out pretty strong performances, and the action, although sparse, is very well shot. I especially enjoyed the nice balance between seriousness and comedy that the film provides. It never lingers too much on a serious or a funny moment, it's always bouncing between the two to create a overall pretty balanced tone. I'd totally recommend checking this one out, as it really does tower over the film that's often packaged with Espionage In Tangiers. At the moment of recording this video, it's available to watch on Shout Factory, so if you can't find a physical copy, then that's probably the best place to see it. Anyway, that's all I have for this episode of Eurospy Cinema, so I'll see you around. Goodbye!